afternoon. My name is Roy Hutchinson, and I'm here to talk about, as it says in the agenda, a seismic shift in brand message. Now, let me get the screen over to you. I guess there you go. The event calendar says that I'll be talking about the third seismic shift in branding, which probably makes you wonder what would have been seismic shifts 1 and 2. And we can talk about it some other day. It's not a topic for today, but just to give you a sense and background, I think the first earthquake moment in branding history was in the 90s, possibly well before many of you came along, in which the concept of brand was pronounced dead. Brands are no longer of any value. I mean, why buy Coca-Cola if the supermarket equivalent of a cola drink costs 3 times less and tastes roughly the same? So brands are useless. Price is what matters. Promotion is what matters. Brand is dead. We can talk about it some other day or in the breakout rooms should you wish. The second earthquake moment in branding history was the advent of social media, which of course is much more familiar to all of you. You go from television advertising and radio advertising in which one voice speaks and millions listen, to today's world in which everybody speaks, everybody has an opinion, everybody talks about a brand, and the brand has to orchestrate all that dialogue in its favor. So again, an earthquake moment, a watershed moment, there's before and there's after. And I think today's topic, today's conversation will also be about something of that magnitude, which is a very big change in marketing messaging. In other words, it's not a presentation about technology, but no technology will make marketing fly if the underlying message is poor. And therefore, I think it's a relevant discussion for today. Now, some background on this. If you look at the right side of the slide, you will see that it's talking about purpose, brand purpose. And brand purpose has become a fad, a fashionable thing because of COVID, right? COVID brought all these emotions to the surface, all this anxiety to the surface. So therefore, advertising during COVID was very difficult. How do you advertise when people are locked up, anxious, they have debts in the family, and so on? So purpose had to be at the forefront of any advertising or communication. Now, brands needed to showcase that they were doing something for the greater good, that they were sensitive, and so on and so forth. Now, if you then see some statistics, and these are global statistics throughout the presentation from sources like Edelman, Deloitte, MasterCard, these are trustworthy and global. These are not like US phenomenons. So if you look at some of these numbers on that part, because of the pandemic, people started getting very sensitive about how a specific brand treats its employees, safety of employment, suppliers, cash flow to suppliers, addressing the crises. You know, people decided to shop in their communities as opposed to online to help the local merchant. They became more conscious about where they shop. They would rather not receive a gift than receive a gift from an uncaring brand or merchant. Now, you may think that this is, true, and it was COVID. The point is that it was not only COVID, and purpose is not an overused word that will pass once we have vaccines and COVID is hopefully under control. On the contrary, if you leave aside the pandemic, I think, as I said earlier, the pandemic was a problem for brands to deal with. How do you advertise without appearing insensitive at the time when your public is anguished and worried about their jobs, livelihoods, relatives, etc., society? And that was a problem. And there are many articles all over the world about how brands stopped advertising altogether, some of them because they didn't know how to strike that tone of insensitivity. However, from this point onwards, I think purpose remains, and that's the key point of this talk. Purpose remains as the core of all good advertising. So the pandemic merely accelerated what was already percolating, but purpose ceases to be a problem to overcome in advertising and starts to become an opportunity for the brands that do this well. Now, why? Because we are undergoing something that is off the radar because of the pandemic. but is crucial to the future of brands, which is the largest transfer of wealth in human history. Most of you in the audience are millennials. People like me are baby boomers. And for 20 or 25 years, I've been hearing about the millennial generation, right? And all their characteristics and preferences. Now, there's 2 points which are important about the millennial generation. On the right side of the page, you see that they are the recipients from my generation to yours, as it were, of the biggest wealth transfer in human history, $100 trillion worldwide, 30 trillion of that in the US alone. And of these 30 trillion, 9 trillion in very liquid, cash, stocks, accounts, or semi-liquid homes. So there's massive amount of money coming to that generation, point one. And point two, on the left side of the page, we are in 2021 for the first time witnessing that the entire millennial generation is employed. They are now all between 25 and 40. And that means that either they are in entry level jobs at 25, or they are in the sweet spot of retail at the age of 40, peak years of saving, borrowing, and purchasing, consuming. In one study, which is specific to one European country and specific to one industry, which is retail financial services, the millennial generation is expected to be 43% of all available market revenues. So again, you cannot ignore that wealth transfer. You cannot ignore those highly employed people, and you cannot ignore consequently the massive impact they have on revenue pools. Now, they are a generation different from previous ones in the sense that how do you reach them if they don't care about advertising and they do their best to avoid ads by subscription, by ad blocking, you name it, and the trend is growing. But on the other hand, they also have the characteristic that we all know them for, which is being purpose-driven, value-driven, sensitive, and about 2/3 of them value influence of people they respect and value brands they can respect. So from brand being dead in the 90s to brand being everything is where we are today. Now, some statistics. They will have a preference for a brand that stands for something. They will have a brand preference that affects the environment, or that affects society, or that has had a positive impact on the environment, or if they think the leaders of that company have a positive impact on society, have the right political opinions. They may disengage with the brand even because some executive says X, Y, or Z in an interview, which doesn't resonate with their values. So they're very purpose conscious as a generation. And this again is global, worldwide. This is a sample of about 15 countries, including India, by the way, where many of you come from. Now, here's an example of what purpose-oriented advertising means. It is Burger King saying order from McDonald's. And the central paragraph says everything. We never thought we'd be asking you to do this, but just order. Order from McDonald's if you need to, but order. Because hundreds of thousands of jobs are at risk in our industry if you don't order. So order from whoever. Doesn't need to be from us, but please order. Now, for a fast food brand to have positive brand equity is a massive achievement. And this ad achieved that. So brand message is at the heart of it. Here you see a little bit of Nike in the US election period in 2020. Vote. Use your voice. It doesn't say buy our shoes or our shoes are cheaper or our shoes are better. It says go vote. Why? Because they know that the target audience of millennials now expect, 85% of them expect a brand to be someone who solves problems or society's problems. And that's clearly defined in the research where this comes from, which is a brand must be a visionary. A brand must be a positive source in shaping our culture. So I very much like the idea that a brand would remind people that turnout in an election is critical. Another example is that when governments don't act, brands should step in. So when the bushfire in Australia was raging and people felt that the Australian government was not coping with the situation that well, in this example, Unilever set up their Christmas tree in Sydney using only burned debris, if you will, or remnants from burned wood from the forest fires, with Christmas gifts around it, public space, plaques explaining the criticality of the bushfire crisis, and that reflected well on Unilever. Now, you may say, okay, got it. What we have to do then is wrap our advertising around some purpose-related message. No, because the millennial generation is very sensitive to not being taken for a ride. So in this example, which is again, this one is from the US, but it's also in the footnote, mentioned South Africa, UK, European countries, etc. If you say, or you imply in your advertising that you will take strongly the topic of racial inequality, the consumers will probe into your company, into whether you practice that in your own corporation. They will look in your communications to see if racial diversity is reflected. They will check that you serve all communities, and they will actively boycott your product or brand or not work for you if they feel that you say one thing but don't do it. So if you go back a couple of pages to the Burger King ad, the equivalent failure of that message would be use our credit card from a bank to order food online and we'll give you 15% cash back because you should stay home and safe. That's a very thinly disguised promotional message trying to use the pandemic sensitivity as a cover-up, and it failed miserably, by the way. Now, conclusion, we're running out of time. That pandemic brought out the topic of purpose to the forefront, like Zoom. Zoom existed before the pandemic, only none of us knew. We didn't use it. Now we do. We're having this whole event on Zoom. And what happens is once it's here to stay. Zoom will not go back. Purpose will not go back. And as you see in the all the data I quoted for you is from countries all over the world, including the likes of Brazil, India, in addition to the obvious suspects, US, UK. So I would encourage you to really take this seriously and transform in this earthquake moment how you think about your brand and how you present your brand to society, because society now, for the first time, expects something from your brand. Okay? Thank you very much. Happy to take questions, meet in the breakout rooms, and be in any way available. Thank you so much.